Hello, Gaby.
Hi,
Welcome.
tonight.
How are you doing? Good to see you again.
No, thank you. I was very happy to accept your invitation. I was like, you want to interview me? I'm
Hmm?
usually interviewing people. So I was like,
You
oh,
know, let the roles reverse, right? Anyways, last time I talked to you, I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and I know that you work with immigrants, teaching them English and a lot of other stuff that you do. And I just wanted to let you know that I admire you a lot. Why don't you tell me about your background? You have a very interesting background.
yeah. So I grew up bilingual, even though I'm not an immigrant, which is a little bit weird. I'm African American, but I grew up speaking English and Spanish. So of course you will ask me about that later. Even though both of my parents are African American, they had very different backgrounds. And then I'm also in the middle between two generations. I was born in 95, so I'm technically a millennial and a Gen Z, depending on how you calculate it. It's a little bit of a not really fitting in anywhere from day one, but that's what makes me special.
Exactly. And you like reading a lot. I like that. So, can you tell me where you grew up? You said Maryland and DC.
Yeah, so that area is what we call the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia metropolitan area. So I guess the first 12 years or so I lived in DC, and then after that we moved out to the suburbs.
Oh, wow. So, what kind of school did you grow up in?
Well, I've been all over the place. When I started school, I was at a very small school that was almost like a charter school, but not back then in DC. And most of my fellow classmates were Black, like me. We had a few that were Asian, or a few that their teachers or their parents were from another country, maybe Denmark or something like that. But most of us were Black from there and had roots in the city.
Oh, wow. That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, it was nice, but it also felt kind of weird because most of them spoke just English, and I spoke English with a Latina accent, and they were like, "What?"
That is amazing. Oh, wow. So, how did you learn Spanish?
Yeah, so my parents, after they got married, were Jehovah's Witnesses, so they decided to do volunteer work in this Latino community. In the 90s, there were a lot of immigrants from Central America and Mexico because there were a lot of wars there around that time. And that was when the Spanish community, Latino community, was really growing in Washington, D.C. We had a lot of Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, Salvadoreños, that they were just all coming at the same time, and they needed to hear about the Bible education work that we do in their language, so it would be more interesting to them.
Oh, wow. And then you just picked up the language at the
Yeah, they had
early
been
age.
doing that. Yeah, they had been doing that for 6 years, and then they had me. So,
That is amazing. Wow. And growing up as bilingual, but you also know other languages, right?
yeah, but that didn't come until much later. We were actually doing the Spanish volunteer work until I was about 10 or 11, which is when we moved to the suburbs. That was at the same time. So because me and my sister, when we started school, we started to forget some of our Spanish. They decided, yeah, it would probably be better if we were going to a congregation in our school language, English. So we switched to an English congregation in the suburbs. Um, and that was culture shock too, because we moved from a congregation that was mostly Latino and Central American, and many of them were very short. And we had a few Mexicans and South Americans that were a little bit taller, but that was like the extent of difference that I had seen in my life up to that point. And
Right.
then we moved to an English congregation where there were like over 20 nationalities. And I'm like, you're from where? Where's that? or they would use expressions. I'm like, what does that mean? What do you mean? Make ends meet. Do you have to cook something? But it means
Exactly.
there's a lot of,
Literally.
yeah.
That is so awesome. So how do you think that shaped who you are? And we'll talk about a little bit about Clever Hybrid, but how did it shape who you are currently, that experience?
I think I had a really hard time from like 11 to 13.
Hmm.
Just because I felt like I didn't really fit anywhere. It's like you're too Latina to be Black, you're too Black to be Latina,
Mm.
you're too white to be either of those things. It's like you don't really fit anywhere. Every time I go somewhere, people ask, so where are you from? Sometimes you even get stupid people ask, what are you? And you're like, what kind of question is that? So it took me a while to realize that now in the age of globalization, there are a lot of people like me
Mm-hmm.
that we don't really fit into like the Black, Asian, Latino boxes. We're a whole bunch of mixtures of everything. Even if you are stereotypical Latino or stereotypical Black,
Mm-hmm.
even if your parents are from the same country, there's totally different backgrounds. So these little generic boxes, they never work, but now we're just like, you know what? Tear that up, please.
Exactly. And it's very strange because we have a lot of similarities, even though I grew up in the, in Africa, and I moved when I was a teenager, but I still felt like even being born in the same country, but there were different backgrounds, but not about the color. I never felt like I belonged. So it's very interesting um, background, and it's hard when you're growing up. But so as you grew up, how did you come up with this clever hybrid? I really like the name. If you could start with the name, how did you come up with the name?
Well, the name now is about 4 years old. It actually started as I'm going to tell you that it actually started as an electronics refurbishing company.
Hey.
And then it switched over to language and culture things. But clever hybrid is basically just how I view myself. People say smart and they say clever, but the difference between those two, I think, is smart is you have a lot of book knowledge, you know how things theoretically are supposed to work. But clever is you take that book knowledge and you use insight to apply it correctly. And of course, hybrid, just like we have gas and electric cars now, a hybrid is just a mix of two different things that
Yeah.
is more than the sum of its parts. It's even cooler when you mix them together, just like peanut butter and jelly.
I love that. It's awesome. So, well, what do you do at Clever Hybrid?
Well, what we've been doing now since the summer of 2020 is we've been interviewing other clever hybrids. So, just like we had you on our show tonight, we're now on our sixth season. The sixth season, I still can't believe it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we've interviewed people from all over the Americas. I haven't gotten anybody from Canada yet. I'm looking if you guys know of anybody. We've had different people in Europe, from Romania, Germany, Spain, and even in Africa. We had some people from South Africa and other people in the diaspora from Ethiopia and Eritrea as well. And this season, we're also having our first person from Asia, a storyteller from Japan.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's like you're connecting with you know, with all kinds of people from different walks of life and from um, different countries. That sounds very exciting. And so do you have clients also? Like I know that you teach English. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, so I also teach English mostly to Latinos right now because that's how, at least in my view, when you're learning another language, it helps to have a teacher that understands your culture, because English or any learning any other language shouldn't be a one size fits all process. There are certain tendencies that Latinos tend to have with their pronunciation, or certain aspects of the language that are a little bit more difficult, that I can focus on those because I know about them. Or even I've also had clients in the past that have been Habesha, Ethiopian, or Eritrean as well, that are learning English. And both of those groups struggle with TH, but in a different way. So you have to know the differences there. I've also in the past have taught Spanish, German, Tigrinya also. So it's just a matter of having those resources for someone to be able to learn a language in their mother tongue, in their based on their first culture.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. So, how many languages do you speak?
I would say right now 4.5, because I can have a conversation in English, Spanish, Tigrinya, or German, but I can only really understand Amharic. I have a trouble explaining myself in Amharic, so 4.5.
Oh my goodness. Still, other than, okay, so 2.5 languages you had to learn as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why did you choose to learn those languages? Or was it just because you are a clever hybrid? You just wanted something to learn.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. When I've relearned Spanish grammar in high school, that was interesting. And I had two great teachers, which I'm very grateful to them to this day for teaching me different self-study techniques. But when I tried to apply that to another language that I was just curious about, but I didn't have a reason for, my logical brain is like, why are we wasting time on this hobby? This is stupid. But once I had a reason, then I was able to create a plan and make it work. So for Tigrinya, I started with that when I was 18, just like when my parents got married and they moved to help Spanish speakers. I also decided to do that with Tigrinya speakers. Yeah, Washington, D.C. is the biggest Habesha, Ethiopian, Eritrean diaspora outside of Africa. So it's very important to reach those people in their first language. Most of the Habesha people in US are Amharic speaking.
Wow.
Maybe about 75% of them. And there was already work going on in that language, but we started to notice in the Amharic congregations, there were a lot of people that were native Tigrinya speakers that also spoke Amharic. So we were like, okay, we need to have something special for them because they're getting it here, but it's not really hitting here in their heart because it's just kind of like intellectually understanding it.
Wow.
Yeah, so now I've been learning Tigrinya 8 years this month because I started in February 2014.
Wow.
But that was once you have a solid why, that is very helpful. But then you also need to have the right skills and maybe a few people you can ask to show you how for you, not like generic how, like how for you personally.
Right.
So yeah, that's how that started. I've also had a very good teacher who was native Tigrinya speaker, and she gave me some more self-study techniques. And I also did research on my own. There are a lot of different books out there now about how to learn a language using modern technology or having a modern schedule where you don't have that much time, but you still need to be consistent. So yeah, through a lot of trial and error, I figured out something that worked for me that could be adapted to other people.
That's incredible. I mean, your self-dedication is like out of the world. I mean, I understand the why, but most people, oh my God, this is difficult. And then from learning English and I mean, you had to learn English when you were a kid, and then Spanish, and then switch all the way to an African language it's very, very different. So how was that experience for you? Was it frustrating or is it different? Was it shocking? I'm just curious.
It was interesting because with Latin languages, there's so much information out there about those: Spanish, German, French. There's a whole bunch of, well, German isn't a Latin language, but European and Latin languages. There's a lot of information about those. When you get into indigenous languages, whether that's African, Asian, or even in Latin America, indigenous languages, it's very hard to find anything in those, number one.
Yes.
And then when you find stuff, it's kind of like, this is kind of half done. Where's the rest of?
Yeah.
So that was the hardest part, I think, to find resources to work with. Yeah, I think that was the hardest part. And I'm not gonna lie that it was totally like, I love this, blah, blah. There were like 2 or 3 times where I was like, you know what, forget Tigrinya, I ain't doing this no more. And I had to take a week off to just get myself back together. There were a few times like that. So it's a process.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the 2 hardest things were having to be the first one that was doing that, and then also not really having that much to work from. So you're building it as you're going along. You're just kind of like, verbs. Okay.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then you had to learn German? I heard that's the hardest language. My husband used to work in Austria. He lived there for 2 years, and he said it's a very, very difficult language. So how was that experience for you?
English and German are sister languages, kind of like Spanish and Portuguese.
Okay.
But German is the really nerdy cousin.
Okay, I love that.
So German is very specific. They have some long compound words that if I wrote it, it would be from this end of the screen to the other end of the screen because it's very specific. And the grammar is also very specific. They have one type of grammar for the direct object and another for the indirect object. In English, we just say the for everything.
Right.
So that I'm still struggling with that. I'm going to be honest with you. I do much better when I'm writing because I have more time to think about it.
Right.
When I'm speaking, I still make a few tiny grammatical errors, but I'm able to communicate, which is more important than being 100% correct.
That's amazing. And you live in Germany, right?
I live in Frankfurt in Southwest Germany.
And how is the cultural shock there has been? I'm sure you are used to it now, but
yeah.
How is it different from the US?
I would say that Frankfurt is trying to pretend to be Brooklyn, New York. Pretending to be Brooklyn, New York. They even call themselves Manhattan instead of Manhattan. Manhattan is what they call themselves. And like, that's cute. But I think the main thing that I like here is even though it's a German city, it's a very diverse city. So there are a lot of white Germans here, stereotypical white Germans, but there are also second, third, fourth generation Turkish Germans, Ghanaian Germans, Colombian Germans, Romanian Germans, Polish Germans, that they've been here a long time. Wow. And they still have some aspects of their family's culture. Maybe they like to eat the food from their culture, or they go home every summer or stuff like that. So that has helped in that people are more used to immigrants here. Wow. But it can also hurt you if you're not paying attention, because since it's an international city and it's also the finance capital of Germany, lots and lots of people speak English here. So if you're not careful, you could live here without learning any German. So whenever I go outside, I make sure that I do my very best not to speak to anyone in English.
Wow. So, I had no idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like a very diverse place. And seems like this global culture wherever we find that wherever we go. So it was not as hard as maybe you thought, or or as I thought, because every time I think about German, I'm like, okay, there's no, there are no people who look like me or um, other immigrants. So it's incredible to hear that. Like, it's actually diverse.
Yeah, it's weird because just like in American TV, if you watch American TV, you think everybody is white or black.
Right.
But the US is very diverse too. Germany has
Yes.
that same problem where most of the people on TV are white people with either blonde or brown hair. But that's not the reality here. Even for Habesha people, there have been Habesha people here since the 60s, maybe even
Wow.
earlier than that.
Wow.
So there's a lot of different people here. I think the hardest thing is skin color is still an issue sometimes, but I think the hardest thing is people assuming that you're going to be a certain way based on how you look.
That's true.
So there are a lot of mixed people here too that are half African, half European, or half Asian, half European.
Right.
And they've go through a lot of being stuck in between cultures, or even if you have parents that look like you, but they're first generation and you're second generation, you have a totally different outlook on life. So
Yeah.
it's just making sure you understand the individual.
Right. It's incredible. And the assumption is everywhere, right? Either the way you speak or the way you look, people make assumption and we do it. I think that's what um, being human means, that we need to struggle with. We make assumption all the time. Um, and representation matters, right? Because you're right. Like when we look at the on TV, it doesn't really give us the reality on the ground. So that's really interesting for me to learn that there's diversity in German. That's like a what?
Yeah,
um,
there's a lot all over Europe, even in Eastern Europe where you wouldn't expect it.
that's incredible and good to know. So you have been exposed to many cultures since you were, a child. And how did it impact your teaching? You as a teacher? What gifts do you bring to your students because of this cultural exposure?
Well, I think I'm a bit ahead of the curve because now we're focusing on you have to make things culturally relevant, and I'm like, I already knew that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's before we mostly just focus on introvert, extrovert, and then we kind of got into ambivert a little bit. But that's just scratching the surface of all of this. You can have an extroverted Mexican that is totally different from an extroverted German person. So you have to consider not only the personality type, the country, the region, also what generation are they in their place. That affects a lot of different things. If they're first or second or third, however many generations out. There's a
Right.
lot of different factors that I feel like now it's becoming a bit more holistic. And now
Mm,
I'm reading books about it. I'm like, I already knew that, but she just
yeah.
said it in words.
Yes, exactly. You're right. That's the gift of growing up with different cultures, right? You're exposed and you're like a global citizen kind of thing. Um, like you said, hybrid. And what techniques do you think help um, immigrants learn English, or anyone actually learning a second language or a third language? What techniques could you offer might help to be consistent and then learning the language?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the level. So I would describe it as being three levels: the beginner, the intermediate, and now the more advanced person. So the beginner, the mistake that a lot of people make is they start trying to learn verbs like I walk, she walks, blah, blah. I'm like, you don't need that right now. You need to be learning two things right now. full sentences of what you need, like where's the bathroom, or I am lost, can you help me? You need
Yeah,
to
that's a
learn,
good one.
yeah, you need to learn these, what I call them, trouble phrases, or even how to ask, how do you say blah 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 in English, German, whatever. So you need to learn those type of phrases. And then also, if you're gonna learn vocabulary, focus on the first 625 words that a child would learn.
Mm,
So up, down, left, right, and then you can put those into your template sentences. Like, I need to go to the grocery store, or I need to go downtown. Learn the nouns that go with your sentence structures at the beginning. That will help you to at least communicate basically what you need, almost like a toddler. They can tell us what they want, and they don't have to be all like, for the aforementioned, forsooth, ish.
I
It's
love that.
enough to not be able to explain exactly what you mean, but still get your point across for the beginners. Once you're in the intermediate, then you have to believe, first of all, that you're intermediate. You can't do the same stuff that you did when you were a beginner.
Right.
This is where a lot of people get stuck, because they're just like, yeah, I'll just keep learning random vocabulary and add it to. I'm like, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
So now that you're intermediate, you should be able to kind of read and write and listen to the language a little bit. So you should find something that you like to do in that language. Maybe you can find a blog that you write to read, not a whole book, just a blog, because a book can be a little bit too intimidating. So try and find a blog that you like to read, or even someone on LinkedIn or Instagram that they do posts that you like reading, and you can be like, okay, I don't know what that word is. Let me look up that particular word, and you can increase your vocabulary that way.
Yeah.
This is the point when you should start learning verbs and also adjectives and adverbs. So what's the difference between adjectives and adverbs? Adjectives is explaining a person, place, or thing, like someone is clever, or they're smart, or they're annoying.
Yeah.
An adverb is something you add to a verb to tell you how you're doing it. So you're walking slowly or
Mm.
quickly.
Yep.
Or snoring loudly. So you need those words to just add some spice to your vocabulary now. For verbs too, you can look up online what are the top 10 verbs in your language that you're learning, and start learning those first in the present tense, because we're usually asking for something we need right now. Then the past tense after that, future if you're feeling fancy. And then once you got those three down, not even for all of the people, you could just say I, we, and you. Learn those.
Right.
Then once you have those down in the present, past, and future, then you can try the present continuous and the past continuous. I am going, I was going.
Yeah.
So yeah, from there you build it from the top 10 verbs to the top 25 to the top 50, and then to the top 100 for the intermediate. And that will grow your vocabulary like.
That's incredible. Yeah, those are very useful nuggets of information. I'm learning Italian currently, and this kind of gives me a little bit frame and structure what I need, how to navigate that. So that is so incredible. So how do we learn the nonverbal communication? That has always been a fascination of mine, because you actually cannot learn it in classroom setting. Um, what advice do you have for people to, because these are very important, right? Navigating the nonverbal cues and norms. How do you think students can learn those, or how do you guide them?
Well, again, it depends on the language you're learning. if you're learning a more quote unquote common language, like a European language or Latin language, there might be some information about out there about cultural awareness. I know I've found in the past for some of my Asian students when I had a few from Japan and Korea about US things, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that wrong, or the other way around.
Yeah, yeah,
So there's that, but also this is a good chance to kill two birds with one stone. If you know someone from that culture, you can ask them, like, I see that you do this a lot,
yeah.
but only with this hand. Why just this hand and not the other hand? And they'd be like,
Right,
oh, the other hand is dirty. You don't use that for anything. And you're like,
right.
oh.
A cultural difference, right? Yeah,
Yeah. So that's a good way to also break the ice or make a new friend. Be like, I see you do this all the time. What does that mean? Or they make them feel comfortable enough to ask you too, because you might be doing something that they really don't like, but they don't know how to tell you.
right. Yep. I usually give people permission. Please do not be afraid to correct me because I'm not from here or something like that. So you're saying they can make friends and then ask questions and not to be afraid. I like that. And a lot of immigrants, they struggle with not being appropriate or, being afraid to ask. So that's a very, very good advice. Just break the ice, not literally.
Yeah, even for people that you think should be the same,
Right.
it's still not the same. Like in the US, we have about 5 or 6 different distinct regions. And even within the regions in each state, there are certain things that are appropriate and not appropriate. So don't assume, oh, this person is American, they're going to be this way. Not necessarily. So
Yeah.
ask them. Even
Yeah.
if you meet someone who speaks English from the UK, the
Yeah.
UK is 3 countries, England,
Yeah.
Wales, and Scotland, and they're all different.
Yeah. Even the accent is different, right?
Uh,
Right? Yeah. That's so awesome. These are really, really useful tips for people who speak, other languages and then they're trying to navigate another language or, who are trying to speak English. Because language is very important, right? That's how we communicate and that's how we explore the world within the language. And it's really awesome what you do. Um, Aside from teaching, also you do this clever hybrid so that people can learn about different cultures, right? And listening, you have a podcast, right?
right. So we
Right.
have it as a podcast so you can listen on the go, but we also have it as video format, mostly because
Yeah,
maybe 90% of communication is nonverbal, and you can also see how each person talks to the camera a little bit differently.
right,
And it's helpful to see that because you can kind of see, okay, they have this vibe or
right,
certain things.
right,
And if you grew up in a place where, like I did at the beginning of my life, you'd never seen anybody who looks this way that you can actually see someone having a conversation with.
right.
So
Exactly.
even
Exactly.
though you didn't get to meet them, you can see, okay, so
Yeah.
this person is from there and they're like that. And you're like, okay, that's interesting.
It's really amazing because I like that because you speak to different kind of people from different culture and oh, like you said, oh my God, this is really awesome. And that's one way to learn about their culture as well. So I encourage people to watch your videos and then on YouTube and then listen to your podcast. So where can people find you?
Well, right now I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so you can find me under my name, Gaby Van Horn. Or if you're like, I don't like you that much, I'm just gonna watch the podcast. You can find Clever Hybrids on LinkedIn also or YouTube. I'm also listed as Clever Hybrids on TikTok as well.
Oh, awesome. So I will I'll put all that information there. And Gabby, I can't thank you enough for coming. Do you have one last advice for anyone who's learning a new language or exploring a culture, a new culture?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is know that it's not a one and done process. This is an ongoing thing. Even though I've been learning Tigrinya for 8 years, I'd never say that I'm done. I'm just now getting into like regionalisms of like these people sound different from different cities. So it's always something new if you're open to that. And number two is never compare yourself to anybody else. Yes, maybe your cousin learned it in like 2 seconds and you've been learning for 2 years and you feel like you can't do anything, but compare yourself to where you are now versus where you were 2 years ago, yourself. So it's not a race. It's just based on what you have enough time to commit to, being consistent, and having a very specific goal. That's all I would add.
That is amazing. Thank you. Mo بروح معرفي يغني
Here one half day.
testing your Tigrinya. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. We had a good time.